Okay, here you are. You're passionate. You got the arguments. You're not happy with the way things are going, but it's a government conference essentially. You go around the hall here talking to people. How are you going to get your views across? Are you working with specific delegations? Can you name names of who are sympathetic and who are not?
Well, first of all, as Friends of the Earth and Friends of the Earth International, so we're the international federation here, we work with all governments. We'll talk to all governments to try to persuade them of our position. And on forests in particular, we do have some very real concerns. There are some governments that are more open to our ideas than others, and so we work with both. We will work both with those that are open to us and those that aren't to try and persuade them, of course.
But are you confident? I mean, I know it's only day 3. You're saying that a lot of the sound and fury of today and a little bit of yesterday is just, that's what happens at these conferences. So what are the main blockages that you see?
Okay, I think there's some very big issues on the table which are proving to be blockages. The first one is the low emissions targets that the developed countries have so far offered. And I think it's going to be very, very difficult for developing countries to accept an agreement that actually would be climatically a disaster, where the rich countries simply aren't prepared to cut their emissions enough to avert runaway climate change. So that's the first one. Emissions targets from rich countries are way too low. The second one is finance. So the UN comes out and says it looks like to compensate developing countries, to enable them to go green, would take about 500 to 600 billion a year. So far, the rich countries have proposed 100 billion at most, and a lot of that is actually coming from a very unreliable carbon market and so on. So there's this massive gap between the money needed and the money that's on offer. So those are the two big blockages.
But there's a lot of talk around the conference. There's a lot of suggestions of short-term finance promises from the industrialized countries. And developing countries, when you talk to them, are saying, well, it's nice there's something on offer, but it doesn't sort out the problem of long-term finance. Is this a problem?
That would be simply true. If there isn't a solution to the long-term finance, then the short-term finance is good for the short term, but it provides no long-term solution. I think the other big though is trust. And I think a lot of the stuff we've been talking about the reaction to Tuvalu's proposal and so on, is all about trust. And there is such a history here. I mean, it's a very human thing. If you've been hurt over and over again, you stop believing what the person who hurts you says. So developing countries feel with considerable justification that promise after promise after promise has been broken. So they find it very difficult to believe rich countries when they say, believe us, we're really trying to sort this out.
Anuradha's trying to grab the microphone. I'm just going to ask one more question as a follow-up. I've got the mic. Is this not, though, the same as sound and fury as you were saying before? The industrialized countries aren't going to put money on the table till much closer to the end of the conference. This is their negotiating card, in a sense. Are you not overplaying it a bit, that they're likely to come up with a little bit more?
Well, at Friends of the Earth, we would be absolutely delighted if they did come up with more, and we are pushing for them to do so. But I think there's some very real problems here. All the mood music we're getting out of the United States is that Obama doesn't want to put finance figures on the table before he's confident of getting something through the Senate, because actually it could go the other way. It could make it harder for him to get something through the Senate. Politically, you can understand that in the US domestic context, but here at Copenhagen, that's a massive problem, and so there are some very genuine issues around this. So I don't think this is just sound and fury. I think we have a genuine blockage around finance.
But, given that the world could find $1 trillion overnight...
Absolutely. Yeah.
Can't people see? This is so idiotic.
It's back to political will, again, yes.
Yes.
So, and we can find billions to keep our arms spending up. We can bail out the banks. We can, the money is there for those things. How come it's so difficult to find it for climate change? And I think that is partly about politicians' priorities, and it's also about the internal domestic politics of some of the rich countries.
So we're really back to mindsets again.
We're back to mindsets.
Absolutely. And the trust issue, things like the Danish paper won't have helped the trust issue.
No.
Is it possible to conduct something much more like this in a place where everybody can hear, where people can hear all over the world, because this is being broadcast all over the world, and they can interact. In fact, we haven't looked at the Twitters, because what you've been saying is so interesting. We haven't stopped. Yeah. But normally with interviewees, we listen to all the questions as well. So, is it that in order to save the world, save billions probably of people from ruin, we have to actually move the whole conference process to something that is more open, profoundly more open?
It's a good point. I mean, that you can have a long philosophical discussion about the nature of democracy. The good thing about the UN process is that you do get countries, theoretically, one country, one vote, although we know they have very different powers, and that is what this process tries to do, which is one reason we were reacting quite strongly to the Danish paper, because it seemed to have been cooked up by a small number of countries without the full participation, the democratic participation of states here at the UN. But I think there's something really important also to say is that civil society is mobilizing a lot around this Copenhagen conference. There's the Klima Forum downtown in Copenhagen, where large numbers of civil society groups are also mobilizing. We will see big, hopefully peaceful demonstrations in Copenhagen on Saturday. My own organization, Friends of the Earth, has been very involved in organising something called the Flood. We hope we're going to have tens of thousands of people turning up to put pressure on the negotiators to do the right thing. And I think we need to accompany these political negotiations, which are often very, very technical and very complicated, with some quite simple, popular, normal people pleading for their leaders to lead and do the right thing. And I think it's that combination that gives me hope that we can get further in these negotiations towards a strong and fair deal than you might think at the moment. I don't think we're going to get the perfect outcome. I'm not naive. We are very, very unlikely to get a very strong and very fair deal. But I think we can push it a lot further than it currently is.
We've got to wrap up, so you want to get one more question in?
Well, just to say, we just need to push it above the parapet now that all these world leaders are coming, people are taking it seriously. Yeah. Regard that as the first step in that.
We need to strengthen the finances, strengthen the commitments to cut emissions, and we need to make sure that there is a review period very shortly down the road so that we can ratchet it up even more soon and not find out we've left it too late to make a difference.
COP 15.5.
15.5. I mean, we think that this needs to be wrapped up legally within 3 months, 6 months latest. I would say that we already have a legally binding treaty. It's called the Kyoto Protocol. We need to wrap that one up here. But in terms of bringing other countries on board, that needs to be done in 6 months max.
Great. Thank you so much, Andy.
Thank you.
Really, that was wonderful. And maybe next week...
Yeah, sure. I'm very happy to do a kind of update on...
Yeah, and tell us what's been happening and whether, all our hopes are being actually satisfied, or
whether we all need to buy boats and row off.
Okay. Thanks very much, Andy Atkins of Friends of the Earth, and thank you, Anuradha, for fighting with me over the microphone in such a very calm way. Now we've got to wrap up, so thank you.